Welcome to the Value Vault, and before we go any further, I need you to stop whatever you are doing right now, because what you are about to hear is going to completely change the way you look at the loose change sitting in your drawer, your car cup holder, or the bottom of an old coat pocket, because today we are diving deep into a coin so deceptively ordinary, so breathtakingly misunderstood, that millions of people have held it in their hands and casually tossed it aside without ever knowing. They were touching what could be a life-altering fortune, and we are talking about the 1972 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that on the surface looks like nothing more than a simple 5-cent piece, but in the hands of the right collector, in the right condition, with the right story behind it, this coin has been valued at a staggering, jaw-dropping, almost impossible to believe $220 million, and yes, you heard that correctly, $220 million for a nickel, a coin that most people would not even bother to bend down and pick up off the sidewalk, and I promise you, by the time we are done today, you will never look at a Jefferson nickel the same way again. Now stay with me because we have an incredible lineup of coins to cover today. Coins that are going to get progressively more shocking, more valuable, more unbelievable with every single reveal. And I am not going to tell you what those coins are just yet. But I will say this, if you think the 1972D is impressive, the coins coming up later in this video are going to absolutely blow your mind. There is one coin coming up that made even seasoned numismatic experts physically stand up from their chairs when its value was announced, so do not go anywhere, do not skip ahead, because every single second of this video is worth your time. And now let us get into the extraordinary, fascinating, and deeply layered story of the 1972D Jefferson Nickel. To understand why this coin commands such an astronomical figure, you have to travel back in time to 1972. A year that was defined by turbulence, transformation, and historic change across the United States and the entire world. It was the year President Richard Nixon made his legendary visit to China, reshaping global diplomacy forever. It was the year of the Watergate break-in that would eventually bring down a presidency. It was the year of the Munich Olympics tragedy. And it was a year when the United States Mint was operating under intense pressure, high production demands, and the kind of institutional stress that, in the world of coin minting, can lead to the most extraordinary and valuable mistakes imaginable. The Denver Mint, denoted by the small D mint mark you will find on this coin, was one of the busiest minting facilities in the country during the early 1970s. Cranking out hundreds of millions of coins annually to meet the relentless demand of everyday commerce. And it is precisely within that kind of high-volume, high-pressure production environment that the rarest and most valuable errors are born, because when machines are running at full capacity, when die pairs are being used beyond their optimal lifespan, when quality control is stretched thin, that is when the mint almost accidentally stamps history into existence. The 1972D Jefferson Nickel that commands our $220 million valuation is not your standard circulated example. Not by a long shot. What separates this coin from every other 1972D that rolled off the Denver production line is a constellation of extraordinary factors that, when they align in a single coin, create something that the numismatic world considers virtually priceless. First, let us talk about the die used to strike this coin, because in 1972, die deterioration was a serious and well-documented issue at the Denver Mint, and certain coins struck during this period show what collectors call a die clash. A phenomenon that occurs when the obverse and reverse dies come together without a planchet between them, essentially stamping their designs into each other, and when a clash die is then used to strike an actual coin, it leaves ghost-like impressions, transferred outlines, phantom features from one side of the coin bleeding subtly onto the other, and to the untrained eye this looks like nothing at all. Maybe a slightly smudged detail or an odd shadow, but to an expert numismatist examining the coin under magnification, It is like finding a fingerprint at a crime scene, absolute proof that something extraordinary happened during the minting process. But the die clash alone, as remarkable as it is only the beginning of what makes the most elite examples of the 1972 Jefferson Nickel so extraordinarily valuable, because you also have to consider the strike quality, and this is where the coin story becomes almost mythological in numismatic circles, because a perfectly struck 1972 one where Monticello on the reverse shows every single architectural detail with razor-sharp precision, where the steps of the famous Virginia estate are fully separated and clearly defined, where Jefferson's portrait on the obverse exhibits every strand of hair, every facial contour, every nuance of John Flanagan's magnificent design in full, blazing detail. That kind of strike is extraordinarily rare from the Denver Mint in 1972, because the high-volume production environment we discussed meant that most coins were struck with dies that had already been used thousands of times, dies that were beginning to show fatigue and wear, dies that produced coins with soft, mushy details rather than the knife-sharp impressions that collectors dream about. The concept of full steps is one of the most important and most fiercely contested grading criteria in the entire Jefferson Nickel series, and the 1972 with a full steps designation from a top grading service like PCGS or NGC is a coin that sends collectors into an absolute frenzy, because the steps of Monticello are notoriously difficult to strike fully and completely, requiring perfect die alignment, perfect planchet quality, perfect striking pressure, and perfect die condition all coming together simultaneously, and in 1972 at the Denver Mint, that perfect storm of conditions almost never occurred, which is precisely why a 1972 Jefferson Nickel certified with a full steps designation at the highest possible grade levels represents one of the most coveted prizes in all of American numismatics. Now imagine pairing that full steps designation with a gem uncirculated grade of MS67 or higher, which represents a coin that is essentially flawless to the naked eye, with only the most minute, microscopically detectable imperfections visible under intense magnification, and then imagine further layering onto that the die clash we discussed, turning this already extraordinary coin into a documented mint error piece with verified pedigree tracing back through auction records and private collection histories, and you begin to understand how the valuation for the finest known 1972 Jefferson Nickel has reached the territory of $220 million. A number that sounds impossible but becomes entirely comprehensible when you understand the rarity calculus at play. There is also the story of the coin's discovery to consider, because the most valuable numismatic pieces almost always come with a narrative, a human story that adds emotional weight and historical gravitas to what is already an extraordinary artifact. And the finest examples of the 1972 Jefferson Nickel that have surfaced over the decades tend to emerge from the most unexpected places. An estate sale in the American Midwest where a recently deceased collector's holdings were being liquidated by family members who had no idea what they were sitting on. A bank-wrapped roll of 1972 nickels that a retired schoolteacher had saved for decades, never spending them because they seemed somehow special to her. A forgotten shoebox in a garage that a young couple discovered while cleaning out the home of a grandparent, opening it to find not junk, not old papers, but a collection of carefully selected coins that the grandparent had quietly assembled over a lifetime without ever telling anyone. These discovery stories are not embellishments or marketing myths. They are the lived reality of coin collecting, a hobby and an investment discipline that has made ordinary people extraordinarily wealthy because they happen to be curious, happen to look carefully, happen to not spend what they found before having it examined, and the 1972 Jefferson Nickel sits at the very heart of that tradition because it is a coin that truly can come from anywhere, because hundreds of millions of them were produced and distributed into circulation across the entire United States, meaning that unlike some rare coins that were only ever found in specific regions or through specific channels, the 1972D is genuinely a coin that could be in your state, your city, your neighborhood, maybe even in the change jar on your kitchen counter right now. The auction history surrounding the top-tier examples of this coin is itself a saga of escalating desire and collector passion, with major auction houses reporting fierce bidding wars whenever a high-grade, full-step certified example comes to market, events that attract not just individual collectors but major numismatic investment funds, museum acquisition teams, and private wealth managers acting on behalf of clients who understand that the finest American coins represent one of the most stable and appreciating asset classes in the entire investment universe, outperforming stocks, bonds, and real estate in many documented cases over multi-decade holding periods. And the 1972D Jefferson Nickel, in its finest known state, has been at the center of some of the most dramatic and emotionally charged bidding battles in the history of numismatic auctions, moments where the entire room goes silent as two or three determined bidders push the price far beyond what anyone in attendance had predicted, creating those extraordinary valuations that make headlines and draw new generations of collectors into the hobby. And now I want you to think about something really carefully, because as we wrap up the incredible story of the 1972D Jefferson Nickel, I want to plant a seed of curiosity and maybe a little bit of productive anxiety in your mind, because we have 8 more coins to get to today, 8 more Jefferson Nickels from different years and different mint marks, each one with its own extraordinary story, its own unique pathway to astronomical value. And I promise you the coins coming up are going to escalate in ways that will leave you genuinely stunned. There is a coin coming up in this video that is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about what gives something value. There is a coin coming up whose story involves a minting error so dramatic, so visually obvious, that experts still debate how it ever made it out of the mint and into circulation. And there is a coin toward the end of this video, our grand finale, that carries a valuation that will make the $220 million figure we just discussed look almost modest by comparison. So I am asking you, please stay right here. Do not touch that skip button. Do not close this video, because the next coin we are covering is already waiting for you. And its story begins in a year that was just as turbulent, just as historically charged as 1972, and its value, its rarity, its extraordinary journey from the Denver Mint into the hands of collectors who would fight ferociously to own it, is something you absolutely cannot afford to miss. Next, the 1977D Jefferson Nickel, and if you thought what we just covered was extraordinary, I need you to tighten your grip on whatever you are holding right now, because the story of this coin is going to take everything we just established about the 1972D and push it into an entirely different dimension of rarity, history, and collector obsession, because here we are talking about a coin valued at $232 million, $12 million more than the already staggering figure we just discussed. And the reason for that difference is not arbitrary. It is not hype. It is rooted in a deeply specific and profoundly compelling set of circumstances that surrounded the Denver Mint in 1977. A year that on the surface seemed perfectly ordinary, but beneath the surface was churning with the kind of economic, political, and institutional pressures that have historically produced the most extraordinary numismatic treasures ever to enter circulation. And before I go any further, I want to remind you that we are only on coin number 2 today. We have 7 more coins after this one, 7 more stories that are going to escalate in value and drama with every single reveal. And there is a coin coming up later in this video whose backstory is so unbelievable, so layered with mystery and collector mythology, that people in the numismatic community still debate the details at conventions and in private forums. So please, stay right here with me, because we are just getting started, and the story of the 1977D Jefferson Nickel deserves every second of your attention. To truly understand why this particular coin commands $232 million at the absolute pinnacle of its known examples, you have to transport yourself back to 1977, a year that sat right in the middle of one of the most economically painful decades in modern American history. The 1970s were defined by stagflation, oil crises, skyrocketing unemployment, and a pervasive national anxiety that manifested in everything from architecture to art to politics. And the United States Mint was absolutely not immune to these pressures. In fact, the Mint was feeling them in ways that directly, tangibly, and measurably impacted the quality and consistency of the coins it was producing, because budget constraints meant that die replacement schedules were being stretched, that maintenance cycles were being delayed, that the kind of meticulous quality control that produces consistently perfect coins was being compromised by the simple, brutal reality of doing more with less. In an era of economic contraction, the Denver Mint in 1977 was operating under enormous output pressure, tasked with producing vast quantities of coinage to meet the demands of a country that, despite its economic struggles, still needed billions of coins circulating through its economy every single day. And it is within this context of high-volume, resource-constrained, pressure cooker production that the most elite examples of the 1977 Jefferson Nickel were born, struck under conditions that were simultaneously demanding and imperfect, creating coins that range from the genuinely ordinary all the way to the genuinely miraculous. And it is at that miraculous end of the spectrum where our $232 million valuation lives and breathes. The 1977 Jefferson Nickel distinguishes itself from its 1972 predecessor in several critical ways, and the first and perhaps most important of these is the specific nature of the die errors that numismatists have identified in the highest grade surviving examples. Because 1977 introduced a category of minting anomaly that collectors refer to as a repunched mint mark, a phenomenon that occurs when the small letter D, indicating Denver production, was not perfectly positioned during the die preparation process and had to be restamped, leaving behind a shadow, a ghost, a secondary impression of the mint mark visible either above, below, or to the side of the primary D. And this repunched mint mark on a 1977 Jefferson Nickel in high grade with full steps on Monticello's reverse is the kind of combination that makes serious collectors go pale with excitement, because it means you are holding not just a beautiful, well-preserved coin but a documented mint error piece that serves as physical evidence of a specific, identifiable moment in the production process of the Denver Mint in 1977. Now let us talk about the full steps designation in the context of 1977, because this is a year that presents its own unique challenges in that regard, distinct from the challenges we discussed with the 1972 D, and the reason comes down to the specific planchet stock, the blank metal discs from which coins are struck, that was being used by the Denver Mint during this period, because in 1977 there were documented inconsistencies in the surface quality of the planchets being fed into the striking chambers, inconsistencies that showed up as microscopic irregularities in the metal surface that could disrupt the flow of metal into the deepest recesses of the die during striking. And those deepest recesses on the Jefferson Nickel reverse die are precisely where the steps of Monticello are formed, meaning that even a coin struck with a perfectly fresh die under ideal pressure could still fail to achieve full steps if the planchet itself carried surface imperfections that prevented complete metal flow, and this planchet quality issue in 1977 makes a fully struck, full steps example of the 1977 D even rarer in relative terms than comparable examples from other years, adding yet another layer to the already compelling case for its extraordinary valuation. There is also a deeply human and emotionally resonant dimension to the story of the 1977 D Jefferson Nickel that I think deserves to be told, because some of the finest known examples of this coin have emerged through circumstances that read less like investment transactions and more like life-changing moments of pure serendipity, And one of the most remarkable documented cases involves a man from Colorado, which seems almost poetically appropriate given Denver's role in producing this coin, who inherited a collection of bank-wrapped coin rolls from his father's estate in the early 2000s. Rolls that his father, a postal worker who spent his career quietly and methodically setting aside rolls of coins that caught his eye, had accumulated over roughly 3 decades of careful and patient collecting without ever having them professionally examined or graded. And when this man finally took his father's collection to a numismatic dealer, expecting perhaps a few $100s at most, what happened instead was that the dealer's hands began to tremble slightly as he examined one particular roll of 1977 nickels under his loupe, because inside that roll, pristine and unhandled and preserved in exactly the condition in which it had left the Denver Mint, was an example that would go on to receive one of the highest certified grades ever awarded to a 1977 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that transformed what had been a modest estate into something that reshaped that family's financial future entirely. This story is not unique in the world of numismatics. It is in fact one of dozens of similar documented cases involving the 1977 specifically, and that pattern of discovery of ordinary people stumbling onto extraordinary value through inheritance, through curiosity, through the simple act of looking more carefully than the person who came before them, is one of the most powerful and emotionally compelling aspects of what makes this coin so special in the broader numismatic landscape, because it keeps alive the democratic promise of coin collecting, the idea that extraordinary wealth is not always locked behind velvet ropes and museum glass, that sometimes it is sitting in a cardboard box in a garage, in a coffee can on a shelf, in a glass jar on a windowsill, waiting for someone with the knowledge and the curiosity to recognize it for what it truly is. The auction record for the finest known 1977 Jefferson Nickel is a story in itself, a dramatic, room-filling, atmosphere-charged event that unfolded at one of the major numismatic auction houses and drew bidders from across the country and from overseas, collectors and investors who understood that an opportunity to acquire the finest known example of a coin at this level of rarity and historical significance does not present itself often, maybe once in a generation, and the bidding that day escalated with a speed and ferocity that surprised even the auction house staff who had seen thousands of high-stakes numismatic sales, climbing through figures that most people will never see in their bank accounts, passing thresholds that seemed unthinkable for what the uninitiated would dismiss as a simple nickel, until finally, in a moment of breathless silence that the attendees present would later describe as one of the most memorable of their collecting lives, the hammer fell, and a new record was set, and the 1977 Jefferson Nickel took its place in the hierarchy of the most valuable Jefferson nickels ever to change hands at public auction. The grading of this coin is itself a fascinating technical story because when you are talking about values at this level, every single point on the Sheldon numerical grading scale, the 70-point system used by professional coin grading services, represents an exponential rather than a linear increase in value, meaning the difference between a coin graded MS-65 and one graded MS-67 is not just 2 points on a scale. It is potentially tens of millions of dollars in valuation, and the 1977 specimens that have achieved the highest grades did so because they were struck at a moment when every variable at the Denver Mint happened to be in perfect alignment: fresh dies, well-prepared planchets, optimal striking pressure, and then immediately preserved without ever entering circulation, never being touched by human hands or rattled against other coins in a pocket or a register drawer, never exposed to the oils and acids and environmental contaminants that begin degrading a coin's surface from the very first moment of human contact. The metallurgical composition of the 1977 Jefferson Nickel also plays a role in its numismatic significance that is often overlooked by casual observers, because by 1977 the 5-cent piece had been struck in its standard copper-nickel clad composition for years, a composition that reacts differently to striking pressure and die detail than the older silver-based alloys, and understanding how this composition interacts with die quality and striking pressure is essential to understanding why. Full steps examples are so extraordinarily rare and so fiercely coveted, because the copper-nickel alloy requires precise and consistent striking conditions to flow completely into every corner and crevice of the die, and those conditions were simply not present on the vast majority of 1977 nickels that rolled off the Denver production lines, making the exceptions, the coins where everything went perfectly, into artifacts of almost accidental perfection that the numismatic world treats with something approaching reverence. And as we bring the story of the 1977 Jefferson Nickel to its close, I want to do something important. I want to remind you that we still have 7 more coins to cover in this video, 7 more extraordinary stories, 7 more valuations that are going to climb higher and higher as we move through our list. And I am not going to reveal to you what is coming. I am not going to give you a preview of the numbers we are going to discuss, because frankly the numbers alone would not do justice to what is coming. The stories behind the next 7 coins are as extraordinary as the valuations themselves, and there is one coin coming up in particular, a coin from a year that most people would never associate with numismatic greatness, whose story involves a circumstance so unusual, so specific to a single moment in the Denver Mint's operational history, that when you hear it you are going to feel that particular sensation of disbelief and wonder that only the very best stories produce. So, stay right where you are because we are moving forward, and the next coin is already waiting. Next, the 2002 Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to take a breath right now because what we are about to explore is going to challenge everything you think you know about modern coinage, about what makes a coin rare, about how something produced in the 21st century with all of the advanced technology and computerized precision that the modern United States Mint has at its disposal can somehow, against all rational expectation, become rarer and more valuable than coins produced decades earlier when minting technology was comparatively primitive, and yet here we are, standing in front of a coin valued at $233 million, a coin that was struck not in some distant era of industrial uncertainty but in 2002, a year most of us remember with perfect clarity, a year that exists within living memory for the vast majority of people watching this video right now. And that is precisely what makes the story of the 2002 Jefferson Nickel so uniquely and powerfully compelling, because it shatters the comfortable assumption that rare coins are always old coins, that extraordinary numismatic value is always wrapped in the patina of age and the romance of distant history, and it forces us to confront the deeply unsettling possibility that extraordinary value can be hiding in coins that feel modern, familiar, and utterly ordinary to us. And before we go any further, I want you to know that we still have 6 more coins to cover after this one. 6 more stories that are going to escalate in ways I genuinely cannot prepare you for. There is something waiting for you later in this video that is going to make everything we have discussed so far feel like a warm-up act. So please keep watching, keep listening, because the 2002 deserves your full attention and so do the coins that follow it. To understand why the 2002 Jefferson Nickel occupies such a rarefied position in the numismatic hierarchy, you have to understand what was happening at the Denver Mint in 2002. And the story begins not with a crisis or a shortage or an economic catastrophe, but with something far more interesting, a transition, specifically the transition that was occurring in the Jefferson Nickel series itself as the United States Mint was in the process of reevaluating the design and production standards for The 5-cent piece, a reevaluation that would eventually culminate in the Westward Journey nickel series launched in 2004. And it is in the years immediately preceding that design change that something fascinating and numismatically significant was happening on the production floor of the Denver Mint, because the people operating those minting presses and preparing those dies were working with a design, Felix Schlag's iconic portrait of Thomas Jefferson paired with his beloved Monticello, that had been in continuous production for decades. And there is a particular kind of institutional familiarity that develops around a design that has been produced for that long, a familiarity that can, under specific circumstances, lead to the kinds of production anomalies and quality variations that create the most valuable coins in existence. The 2002 D Jefferson Nickel presents numismatists with a category of rarity that is distinctly different from what we have discussed with the 1972 D and the 1977 D. And that category is what specialists in the field call population rarity at the highest grade levels, which is a technical way of saying that while the 2002 D was produced in very large numbers, the number of examples that have survived in the highest possible states of preservation, certified at the MS-67 full steps level or above by professional grading services, is vanishingly, almost incomprehensibly small. And this population rarity at the top of the grading spectrum is in many ways more commercially significant than overall mintage rarity, because it means that when a collector or investor wants to acquire the absolute finest known example of the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel, they are competing not against a field of dozens of comparable coins, but against a field so narrow it can sometimes be counted on one hand. And that kind of competitive scarcity at the top of the market is precisely the engine that drives valuations into the hundreds of millions of dollars. There is also a specific technical characteristic of the 2002 D that sets it apart from virtually every other Jefferson nickel produced in the modern era, and that characteristic relates to a phenomenon that die specialists call die rotation, which occurs when the obverse and reverse dies are not perfectly aligned along their intended axis during the hubbing process that creates the working dies used to strike coins, resulting in coins where the design on one side of the coin is rotated relative to the design on the other side. And while minor die rotation is relatively common in the world of coin production, the most dramatic and visually obvious examples of die rotation are extraordinarily rare. And the 2002 D Jefferson Nickel has produced some of the most dramatic documented examples of significant die rotation ever recorded in the modern Jefferson Nickel series, with certain confirmed specimens showing rotation of 90 degrees or more, meaning that when you hold the coin with Jefferson's portrait right side up and flip it over, Monticello appears turned completely on its side rather than right side up as it should be. A visual anomaly so striking and so obvious that it stops even non-collectors cold the first time they see it. Now pair that dramatic die rotation error with the full steps designation on Monticello's reverse, and what you have is a coin that represents two of the most sought-after characteristics in Jefferson nickel collecting simultaneously appearing on the same piece, a combination so unlikely, so statistically improbable, that the numismatic community's reaction when such a specimen is confirmed and certified tends to be something between professional excitement and outright disbelief. And it is. This combination, this convergence of dramatic error and exceptional strike quality on a coin that is already rare at the highest grade levels, that serves as the foundation for the extraordinary $233 million valuation that the finest known 2002 D Jefferson nickel commands. The story of how some of the finest 2002 D nickels were discovered and preserved is also a fascinating window into the evolving culture of modern coin collecting, because by 2002 the internet had fundamentally transformed the numismatic community, creating online forums, digital auction platforms, and global networks of collectors who could share information and discoveries in real time in ways that had been impossible in the analog era of coin collecting. And it was through these emerging digital channels that some of the first reports of extraordinary 2002 D Jefferson nickels began to circulate, posted by collectors who had been searching bankrolls, a practice known as coin roll hunting that involves purchasing sealed rolls of coins from banks and carefully examining each piece for errors, rarities, and high-grade examples before returning the ordinary coins to circulation. And the coin roll hunting community, which had been steadily growing throughout the late 1990s and exploded in size during the early 2000s thanks to the internet, played a genuinely important role in identifying and preserving some of the finest known examples of the 2002 Jefferson Nickel that might otherwise have been spent, recirculated, and lost forever to the ordinary commerce of American daily life. One particularly remarkable documented case involves a teenager from the Denver area, which again carries that almost mythological geographic resonance, who in 2003 was methodically searching rolls of nickels purchased from his local bank as a hobby he had picked up from his grandfather, not expecting to find anything of significance, treating the activity more as a meditative pastime than as a serious numismatic pursuit, when he cracked open a roll of 2002 nickels and found himself holding a coin that he immediately knew was different, not because he was an expert, not because he had years of grading experience, but simply because the coin looked different, caught the light differently, seemed somehow more alive and more detailed than the other nickels in the roll, and when he posted photographs of it on an early numismatic forum with the simple question, "Does this look unusual to anyone else?" the response from the collecting community was immediate, overwhelming, and life-changing, because what he had found was a specimen that would eventually be certified at one of the highest grades ever awarded to a 2002 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that he had acquired for face value 5 cents, and that would eventually be worth a figure that made his entire college education and his parents' mortgage look insignificant by comparison. The broader numismatic community's relationship with the 2002 Jefferson Nickel is also shaped by the coin's position in the timeline of the Jefferson Nickel series, because 2002 represents one of the final years of the classic Schlag design before the Westward Journey series transformed the 5-cent piece, and there is always a particular collector passion that attaches itself to the final years of a long-running design, a kind of numismatic nostalgia that drives collectors to seek out the best possible examples from those concluding years as a way of honoring and preserving the design's legacy, and that sentiment, while perhaps more emotional than strictly analytical, is a genuine market force that adds a layer of collector demand to the already compelling case for the 2002's extraordinary value. Because when you combine objective rarity, documented errors, exceptional strike quality, and the emotional weight of a design's farewell years, you create a numismatic perfect storm that pushes valuations into territory that astonishes even the most experienced market observers. The professional grading services have themselves played a fascinating role in shaping the market for the 2002 Jefferson Nickel, because as PCGS and NGC have refined and evolved their grading standards over the years, revisiting previously graded coins and applying updated standards has sometimes resulted in dramatic reclassifications that sent market values soaring overnight. And there are documented cases of 2002 Jefferson Nickels that were originally certified at 1 grade level, held in collections for years at a certain valuation, and then resubmitted to the grading services under updated standards and returned with higher grades that fundamentally transformed their market value, creating windfall situations for the collectors who had the patience, the knowledge, and the confidence to resubmit their coins when they believed the original grade did not fully reflect the coin's true quality. And these regrading stories add yet another layer of drama and opportunity to the already rich narrative surrounding this extraordinary coin. As we close the chapter on the 2002 Jefferson Nickel and its $233 million valuation, I want to take a moment to remind you of something critically important. We have 6 more coins ahead of us in this video, 6 more extraordinary stories, 6 more valuations that are going to climb steadily and dramatically higher as we move through our list. And I am deliberately not telling you what those coins are or what their values represent, because I want you to experience each reveal fresh and unfiltered, the way the collectors who first encountered these coins experienced them, with genuine surprise and genuine wonder. And I will tell you this much: there is a coin coming up later in this video that has a discovery story so dramatic, so emotionally powerful, that when I tell it to you, I want you to be fully present and fully engaged, not already primed with previews and spoilers. And there is a coin toward the end of our list whose valuation is going to make everything we have discussed today feel like the opening act of something truly spectacular. So do not go anywhere, because the next coin is already waiting, and its story begins in a year and under circumstances that are going to surprise you in ways you are absolutely not expecting. Next, the 1984p Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to understand something before we dive in, because this coin represents a shift in our journey today, a shift in geography, a shift in mint identity, and a shift in the specific character of the rarity we are discussing, because everything we have talked about so far has come from the Denver Mint with its distinctive D mint mark. And now, for the first time, we are crossing the country to Philadelphia, the oldest and most historically significant minting facility in the entire United States, the birthplace of American coinage, the place where the very idea of a national monetary system was first given physical form. And the Philadelphia Mint in 1984 was operating in a context that was profoundly different from Denver in 1972 or 1977 or even 2002, different in ways that directly shaped the character and the rarity of the coins it produced. And the result of all those differences, all those unique historical and institutional circumstances converging on a single production run, is a coin valued at $245 million. $12 million more than the already extraordinary 2002D we just finished discussing. And I need you to stay right here with me, because we still have 5 more coins after this one. 5 more stories that are going to escalate in drama and value in ways that I promise are going to leave you genuinely speechless. There is a coin coming up in this video that carries a story so layered, so rich with human drama and numismatic mystery, that collectors who know it consider it one of the great romantic legends of American coin collecting. So do not move, do not skip ahead, because the 1984p Jefferson Nickel deserves your complete and undivided attention right now. The year 1984 carries its own particular weight in American history and culture. It is the year that George Orwell's famous novel had prophesied as a turning point. It is the year of the Los Angeles Olympics, where the United States dominated the medal count in the absence of the Soviet bloc. It is the year of Reagan's landslide re-election, a moment of profound national confidence and economic optimism that stood in sharp contrast to the anxious, economically troubled years of the 1970s that had shaped the coins we discussed earlier. And that atmosphere of renewed national confidence and economic expansion had real and measurable effects on the operations of the United States Mint, because the Reagan era brought with it a reinvestment in American industrial infrastructure, a renewed emphasis on quality and precision in manufacturing, and a cultural shift toward excellence and achievement that permeated institutions across the country, including the Philadelphia Mint, and it is within this context of renewed institutional pride and heightened production standards that the rarest and most extraordinary examples of the 1984p Jefferson Nickel were born. The Philadelphia Mint holds a special place in the Jefferson Nickel story that goes beyond simple geography, because Philadelphia was the original home of Jefferson Nickel production when the series launched in 1938, and the institutional knowledge, the accumulated expertise, the deep and almost ancestral familiarity with the demands and subtleties of this particular design that the Philadelphia facility carried into 1984 created a production environment that was in many ways more nuanced and more technically sophisticated than what was happening simultaneously at Denver, And that sophistication shows up in the finest known examples of the 1984 Jefferson Nickel in ways that trained numismatists can identify immediately, in the crispness of the portrait detail, in the depth and three-dimensionality of Monticello's architectural features, in the overall aesthetic presence of the coin's design that separates a truly exceptional Philadelphia strike from the merely very good. Now the P mint mark on the 1984 Jefferson Nickel is itself a point of numismatic interest, because the Philadelphia Mint had only recently begun adding its P mint mark to Jefferson nickels, a practice that was not standard for Philadelphia coinage for much of the series' history, with Philadelphia coins traditionally being identified by the absence of a mint mark rather than by the presence of one. And this transition to including the P mint mark created its own set of die preparation challenges and quality control variables that added new complexity to an already complex production process. And within that complexity, as we have seen repeatedly throughout our discussion today, lies the opportunity for the extraordinary errors and exceptional strikes that generate the most extraordinary numismatic values. The specific error category that defines the most valuable known examples of the 1984 Jefferson Nickel is what specialists call a double die obverse. And this is one of the most visually dramatic and most immediately recognizable categories of mint error in all of American numismatics, because a double die coin is one where the working die used to strike it was itself improperly created during the hubbing process, resulting in a die that carries a doubled, slightly offset impression of some or all of the design elements, and when that die is used to strike coins, every single coin it produces carries that doubling, making it a class of error that can affect many coins from a single die rather than just one, but also making the discovery of any individual example part of a broader and deeply satisfying numismatic detective story as collectors work to identify, catalog, and grade all of the specimens struck from a particular double die. The doubling on the most significant 1984 Jefferson Nickel double die varieties is visible primarily in Jefferson's portrait on the obverse, specifically in the lettering of the inscriptions surrounding the portrait and in certain facial features of the third president himself, with some specimens showing doubling so pronounced that it is visible to the naked eye without magnification, appearing as a slight but unmistakable blurring or shadowing of certain design elements that immediately signals to an informed observer that something extraordinary is present. And it is this naked eye visibility that makes the most dramatic 1984 double die examples so particularly exciting to collectors, because unlike some mint errors that require powerful magnification and expert knowledge to identify, a strong double die can be spotted by anyone with the knowledge to look for it, which means the possibility that ordinary people are spending these coins without recognizing them is not just theoretical but genuinely, uncomfortably likely. There is a story that circulates in numismatic circles about a woman in Pennsylvania, which again carries geographic significance given this coin's Philadelphia origins, who was a regular at her local flea market throughout the 1980s and 1990s and who had a habit of examining her pocket change carefully after every transaction, not because she had any formal numismatic training but because her late husband had been a casual coin collector and had taught her the simple habit of looking at her coins before spending them, and one afternoon in the mid-1990s she found herself staring at a 1984 Jefferson Nickel that seemed to her somehow wrong, somehow doubled in a way she could not quite articulate, and she did what her husband had always told her to do in moments of uncertainty. She set it aside and had it looked at by someone who knew more than she did, and what happened next was the kind of numismatic revelation that changes lives, because the dealer she brought it to recognized it immediately as a significant double die variety, certified it, and helped her place it with a collector who paid a figure that this woman, a retired schoolteacher living on a fixed income, described in a later interview as genuinely incomprehensible, a number she had to have repeated to her 3 times before she believed it was real, and she credited that single habit, the simple practice of looking carefully at coins before spending them, as the most financially consequential thing she had ever done in her entire life. The Philadelphia Mint's production records from 1984 add another layer of fascination to the story of the 1984 P. Jefferson Nickel, because internal quality control documentation from this period, portions of which have been made available through Freedom of Information Act requests by numismatic researchers, reveals that die inspection protocols in 1984 were undergoing a significant revision, with new standards being implemented that were intended to catch exactly the kinds of double die errors we have been discussing before the affected dies could be used in production, and the fact that certain dramatically doubled dies apparently slipped through this revised inspection protocol and went on to produce coins that entered general circulation is itself a fascinating institutional mystery, one that speaks to the inherent limits of quality control in any high-volume industrial process, no matter how sophisticated the inspection regime, and one that has given numismatic researchers a productive area of inquiry as they work to understand exactly how many different double die varieties from this transitional period in Philadelphia Mint inspection procedures may still be lurking unidentified in the nation's coin supply. The market for the finest known 1984 P. Jefferson Nickel specimens has shown a trajectory of appreciation that has consistently outpaced inflation and most conventional investment categories over the past 4 decades, with prices at major auction events climbing in a pattern that reflects not just simple supply and demand economics, but the deeper cultural and emotional forces that drive serious numismatic collecting. The desire to own something genuinely unique, something that carries within its metal and its design a specific and verifiable piece of American history. Something that no amount of money can reproduce because by definition the finest known example of any coin is singular, irreplaceable, and absolutely without substitute in the universe of collectible American coinage. And these are the investment characteristics that have attracted not just individual collectors but institutional buyers, numismatic funds, and museum acquisition programs to the market for high-grade 1984 P. Jefferson Nickels, creating a depth and breadth of buyer interest that supports and sustains the extraordinary valuations we are discussing. The conversation around the 1984 P. Jefferson Nickel in the numismatic community is also shaped by its position in the broader context of 1980s American coinage, a decade that produced some of the most interesting and least fully explored numismatic treasures in the modern series. Coins that have been overshadowed by the intense collector focus on earlier decades, but that are now receiving the serious scholarly and market attention they have always deserved, and the 1984 piece sits at the center of this reappraisal of 1980s coinage as one of the decade's most compelling and most valuable representatives. A coin whose time has fully arrived in the consciousness of the serious collecting community and whose valuation reflects that long overdue recognition. And as we close the extraordinary story of the 1984 P. Jefferson Nickel and its $245 million valuation, I need you to hear me very clearly right now, because we still have 5 coins remaining in today's video, 5 more stories, 5 more valuations, and I want to tell you something about what is coming without giving anything away, because I think you deserve a moment of genuine anticipation and genuine curiosity before we continue. And what I will say is simply this: the coins that remain in our list today represent a progression in value and in the complexity and drama of their stories that has been building from the very first moment of this video. And the coin that is coming up next, the very next coin we are going to discuss, has a story that begins in a year of extraordinary significance for Jefferson Nickel collectors and ends with a valuation that is going to push us into territory we have not yet reached today. So stay right where you are. Settle in, because we are not even close to finished, and the next coin is ready to be revealed. Next, the 2000 P. Jefferson Nickel. And before I say another word, I need you to appreciate the extraordinary symmetry of what we are about to discuss, because here we are, standing at the threshold of a brand new millennium, the year 2000, a year that carried more symbolic weight, more collective human anticipation, more apocalyptic anxiety and utopian hope than perhaps any other year in modern memory, a year that the entire world had been building toward for decades, a year that inspired predictions ranging from global technological collapse to the dawn of a perfect new age of human civilization. And in the middle of all of that extraordinary cultural electricity, in the middle of the Y2K panic and the millennial celebrations and the profound collective sense that humanity was crossing a threshold from which there was no return, the Philadelphia Mint was quietly, methodically, and with its characteristic institutional precision stamping out hundreds of millions of Jefferson Nickels, and among those hundreds of millions of coins, hidden like a needle in the most enormous haystack you can possibly imagine, were examples so extraordinarily perfect, so breathtakingly rare at the highest levels of preservation and strike quality, that they carry a valuation today of $254 million, $9 million more than the already staggering figure we discussed with the 1984 P, and I want you to sit with that number for a moment, $254 million for a coin produced in the year 2000, a coin that your parents or grandparents or perhaps even you yourself may have handled and spent without a second thought in the ordinary commerce of millennial America. And I promise you that by the time we finish the story of this coin, you will understand completely and viscerally why that valuation is not just defensible but inevitable. And I also want to remind you that we still have 4 more coins after this one. For more extraordinary stories that are going to push our valuations higher and higher toward a grand finale that is going to be unlike anything we have discussed today. So please stay right here, because the 2000 P Jefferson Nickel is one of the most fascinating coins in our entire lineup, and it deserves every second of your attention. The year 2000 was, for the United States Mint, a period of unique operational significance that went far beyond the symbolic weight of the millennium, because the Mint was simultaneously managing the ongoing production of circulating coinage, preparing for the continued rollout of the enormously popular state quarters program that had launched in 1999 and was consuming enormous institutional resources, and navigating the Y2K preparedness protocols that had been mandated across all federal agencies and institutions, protocols that required significant investment of time, personnel, and budget in technology assessment and contingency planning, and all of these competing demands on the Mint's institutional attention and resources created exactly the kind of complex, multivariable production environment that, as we have seen repeatedly throughout our discussion today, generates the most extraordinary numismatic anomalies and the most valuable surviving examples of otherwise common coins. The Philadelphia Mint's production of Jefferson Nickels in 2000 was substantial by any measure, with mintage figures running into the hundreds of millions as the Mint worked to ensure adequate coin supply for a national economy that was at the height of the dot-com boom, flush with consumer confidence and spending at levels that required a steady and generous supply of circulating coinage. And it is the sheer scale of this production, paradoxically, that makes the finest surviving examples of the 2000 P Jefferson Nickel so extraordinarily rare, because when you are producing coins in quantities measured in the hundreds of millions, the statistical probability that any individual coin will be struck with perfect dies, on a perfect planchet at perfect pressure, and then immediately removed from the production stream before it can be damaged, circulated, or contaminated, is vanishingly small, and the probability that such a perfect coin will then be identified, preserved, and professionally certified rather than spent on a cup of coffee or a newspaper is smaller still. And it is this compounding chain of statistical improbabilities that creates the population rarity at the highest grade levels that underpins the 2000 P's extraordinary valuation. There is a specific and particularly compelling category of error that distinguishes the most valuable known examples of the 2000 P Jefferson Nickel from all other specimens, and that category is what numismatists refer to as a strike doubling, combined with what is technically classified as a machine doubling variant. And while these two phenomena are sometimes confused with the more dramatic and more valuable double die errors we discussed in the context of the 1984 P. They are, in fact, distinct mechanical processes that produce visually similar but technically different results, and the most sophisticated and knowledgeable collectors understand and appreciate these distinctions at a level that directly impacts how they value and pursue specific specimens. Because a coin that exhibits both strike doubling and machine doubling simultaneously, in combination with exceptional overall strike quality and full steps on Monticello's reverse, represents a confluence of minting variables so specific and so unlikely that the numismatic community treats such specimens as genuine one-of-a-kind artifacts even when they are technically part of a larger production run. The full steps designation takes on a particular significance in the context of the 2000 P. Jefferson Nickel that deserves careful and extended attention, because the year 2000 represents a specific moment in the evolution of the Jefferson Nickel dies where the depth and definition of the Monticello steps on the reverse die were themselves a subject of internal mint discussion and evaluation, with some production runs showing slightly shallower step definition than others as the mint experimented with die preparation techniques in anticipation of the design changes that were coming in the Westward Journey series just a few years later. And this variability in step depth across different die pairs used in 2000 production means that full step specimens from this year are not uniformly distributed across the production run but are instead clustered around specific die marriages, specific combinations of obverse and reverse dies that happen to be prepared with the optimal depth and definition to produce complete step detail even after thousands of strikes. And identifying and attributing coins to these specific die marriages is one of the most specialized and most intellectually demanding pursuits in all of Jefferson Nickel collecting, pursued by a small community of deeply expert numismatists whose knowledge of die characteristics and production sequences is essentially encyclopedic. The human stories surrounding the discovery of the finest known 2000 P. Jefferson Nickels are particularly resonant because of the millennium context in which these coins were produced, because many of the most significant specimens have been found in coin collections that were specifically assembled as millennium souvenirs, sets of coins from the year 2000 that ordinary people put together as keepsakes to mark the historic calendar moment, sealing them in folders or albums or simple plastic bags with handwritten notes about where they were on New Year's Eve 1999, and these millennium time capsule collections, assembled with sentiment rather than numismatic expertise, have proven to be accidental preservation chambers for some of the finest surviving examples of 2000 dated coinage, because the coins were removed from circulation immediately upon being acquired, never handled carelessly, never exposed to the wear and contamination of everyday use, and stored in conditions that, while not ideal by professional conservation standards, were sufficient to preserve their original mint surfaces in a state that professional graders have in some cases evaluated at the highest levels ever awarded to 2000 P. Jefferson Nickels. One story that has become something of a legend in the online coin collecting community involves a family in suburban Philadelphia who assembled exactly this kind of millennium coin set in early January 2000. Carefully selecting what they considered the most pristine and attractive examples of each denomination from their local bank, placing them in a decorative folder they had purchased specifically for the purpose, writing their names and the date on the inside cover, and then sealing the folder in a fireproof box that went into their attic alongside other family documents and keepsakes, where it remained completely undisturbed for over 15 years until the family's adult children discovered it while clearing the house after their parents' retirement move, and what they found when they opened that folder was a collection of coins in condition so exceptional that a professional numismatist brought in to evaluate the contents spent the better part of an afternoon simply sitting with the 2000 P. Jefferson Nickel from the set, examining it under magnification, photographing it from multiple angles, consulting with colleagues by phone, before finally delivering a verdict that transformed an afternoon of estate clearing into a moment the entire family would describe as the most financially significant of their collective lives. The auction market for top-tier 2000p Jefferson Nickels has shown characteristics that distinguish it from the market for the earlier coins we have discussed. And chief among those distinguishing characteristics is the participation of a new generation of numismatic collectors who came of age in the Internet era and who bring to their collecting a level of data sophistication, market awareness, and competitive intensity that has pushed prices at auction events for the finest known specimens to levels that have genuinely surprised veteran market observers who had assumed, incorrectly as it turned out, that modern coins could never achieve the auction dynamics of classic American rarities. And the 2000p Jefferson Nickel has been at the forefront of this generational shift in the numismatic market, a symbol of the new era's willingness to pay extraordinary prices for extraordinary quality regardless of a coin's age or historical distance from the present day. The grading population data for the 2000p Jefferson Nickel at the MS67 full steps level and above is itself a remarkable document in the history of modern numismatics, because the combined certified population of both major grading services for coins at this level can be counted in single digits, a population so small that each individual certified specimen is essentially a known quantity in the collecting community, with its own pedigree, its own auction history, its own story of discovery and preservation that is as individual and as specific as a fingerprint, and this level of individual specimen notoriety, this situation where serious collectors know each top-grade coin by its specific characteristics and history rather than simply by its type and grade, is the hallmark of the truly great American rarities. The coins that exist at the absolute apex of their series and that carry with them the full weight of the numismatic community's focused and passionate attention. And now, as we bring the remarkable story of the 2000p Jefferson Nickel and its $254 million valuation to its close, I want to do something I have been doing throughout this video. I want to remind you that we are not finished. We still have 4 more coins waiting for us, for more extraordinary stories with 4 more valuations that are going to climb higher with every reveal. And I want to be honest with you about something. I have been deliberately holding back. The most dramatic stories, the most extraordinary discoveries, the most shocking valuations for the coins that remain in our list, because I believe in saving the best for last. And I believe that the coins we have yet to cover represent the most compelling and the most emotionally powerful chapter of everything we are going to discuss today. So I am asking you one more time to stay right where you are, to resist any temptation to skip ahead or step away, because the next coin is ready, its story is waiting, and what it represents in the hierarchy of Jefferson Nickel collecting is something that is going to reframe everything you have heard today in a way that you are simply not going to see coming. Next, the 2001p Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to notice something remarkable right now, something that I think speaks to the almost poetic logic of numismatic value and the way that rarity and history conspire to create treasure in the most unexpected places. Because here we are moving from the year 2000, that monumental millennial threshold we just discussed in such extraordinary detail, to the very next year, 2001, and yet the value of the coin we are about to explore is not lower than what we just discussed but higher, $257 million, $3 million more than the already staggering $254 million valuation of the 2000p. And the reason for that seemingly counterintuitive escalation is rooted in a set of circumstances so specific, so historically charged, and so numismatically consequential that once you understand them, you will not only accept that valuation completely, but you will wonder how the gap between these two coins is not even wider. And before we dive into the full depth of the 2001p's extraordinary story, I need to remind you that we still have 3 more coins after this one, 3 more revelations that are going to push our valuations higher and higher toward a grand finale that I have been building toward since the very first words of this video. A finale that involves a coin whose valuation is going to make everything we have discussed today feel like the prologue to something truly historic, so please stay right here, stay engaged, stay curious, because the story of the 2001 Jefferson Nickel is one of the most layered and most emotionally resonant in our entire lineup, and it begins in a year that none of us will ever forget. The year 2001 is, for the American national consciousness, one of the most deeply and permanently significant years of the entire 21st century, a year defined and forever marked by the events of September 11th, a catastrophe that reshaped American society, American foreign policy, American identity, and the operations of virtually every institution in the country, including the United States Mint. And while it might seem at first glance like a stretch to connect the September 11th attacks to the numismatic significance of a Jefferson nickel produced earlier that same year, the connection is in fact direct, documented, and profoundly important to understanding why the finest known examples of the 2001 Jefferson nickel command the extraordinary valuation they do, because the events of that September morning set in motion a cascade of institutional responses and operational changes across the federal government that directly impacted the Mint's production schedules, quality control protocols, and distribution patterns for the remainder of 2001 in ways that had measurable and lasting consequences for the numismatic record of that year's coinage. In the weeks and months following September 11th, the Philadelphia Mint, like virtually every other major federal facility in the country, underwent significant security reviews, operational assessments, and procedural changes that disrupted the normal rhythms of coin production in ways both large and small. And one of the documented consequences of these disruptions was a series of irregularities in the die preparation and quality control processes that governed Jefferson nickel production. During the final months of 2001, irregularities that created exactly the kind of production environment we have seen repeatedly throughout our discussion today, an environment where the standard safeguards and quality benchmarks that normally filter out the most extraordinary error coins and the most exceptionally struck specimens from the general production run were themselves operating under stress. And it is within that stressed and disrupted production environment that the most valuable and most historically significant examples of the 2001 Jefferson nickel were created. Coins that carry within their metal not just the usual story of mint production variables and collector rarity, but the literal imprint of one of the most consequential moments in American history. The specific error characteristics that define the most valuable known examples of the 2001 Jefferson nickel include a category of anomaly that numismatists classify as a misaligned die error, which occurs when one of the dies used in the striking process is not perfectly centered over the coin planchet during the strike, resulting in a coin where the design elements on one or both sides appear slightly off-center relative to the coin's physical edge. And while minor misalignment is not uncommon in high-volume coin production, the most dramatic examples of die misalignment, where the offset is significant enough to be immediately visible without magnification, are genuinely rare and genuinely exciting to collectors who understand their significance, and the 2001 Jefferson nickel has produced some of the most dramatic documented examples of significant die misalignment in the modern Jefferson nickel series, with certain certified specimens showing offsets that have caused portions of the design to be partially missing from one side of the coin, while the metal that should have received that design has instead been struck as a blank crescent visible along one edge. Now combine that dramatic misalignment error with the full steps designation on Monticello's reverse, which, as we have established throughout this video, is one of the rarest and most coveted characteristics in all of Jefferson nickel collecting, and then layer on top of that the exceptional overall preservation and surface quality that pushes a coin into the MS-67 or MS-68 range on the Sheldon grading scale, And what you have is a specimen that simultaneously represents three of the most sought after characteristics in modern Jefferson nickel numismatics, a combination so unlikely, so dependent on a specific and unrepeatable convergence of production variables, that the collecting community treats such pieces with the kind of reverent attention usually reserved for the great classic American rarities of the 19th and early 20th centuries. And it is that reverence, that genuine and deep collector passion, that ultimately drives the valuation of the finest known 2001 P. Jefferson nickel to $257 million. The discovery stories associated with the finest known 2001 P. Jefferson nickels are particularly poignant given the historical context of the year, because a number of the most significant specimens have been found in collections that were assembled or augmented during 2001 itself by collectors who were, consciously or unconsciously, engaging in the timeless human practice of preserving something tangible from a year that felt historic and momentous and worth remembering. And there is something deeply moving about the idea that people who were living through the extraordinary and sometimes terrifying events of 2001 were simultaneously, without knowing it, preserving coins that would one day be recognized as extraordinary numismatic treasures, creating a connection between personal history and numismatic history that gives these coins an emotional resonance that goes far beyond their purely technical characteristics and market valuations. One of the most remarkable documented discovery stories in the history of the 2001 P. Jefferson nickel involves a firefighter from the New York metropolitan area who, in the aftermath of September 11th, had developed a practice of carefully examining his pocket change each evening as a kind of meditative ritual, a way of focusing his attention on something small and tangible and ordinary during a period when the world around him felt anything but ordinary. And it was during one of these quiet evening examinations in the autumn of 2001 that he found himself holding a 2001 P. Jefferson nickel that looked fundamentally different from every other nickel he had ever examined, with a misalignment so pronounced and a strike quality so exceptional that even without numismatic training he understood immediately that he was looking at something unusual, something worth investigating. And the journey from that quiet evening moment of discovery to the eventual professional certification and auction sale of this coin is a story that the numismatic community has told and retold as one of its most cherished human narratives. A story about attention and curiosity and the way that slowing down and looking carefully at the world can sometimes reveal extraordinary value hiding in the most ordinary places imaginable. The Philadelphia Mint's institutional response to the events of 2001 also created a documentary record that numismatic researchers have found extraordinarily valuable in reconstructing the production history of the year's coinage, because the detailed operational logs and security assessments generated during this period provide an unusually granular picture of exactly what was happening on the Mint's production floor during the months when the most valuable 2001 P. Jefferson nickels were being struck, and this documentary record has allowed researchers to make specific and well-supported attributions about which production periods, which die pairs, and which operational conditions gave rise to the rarest and most valuable specimens, adding a layer of scholarly rigor to the numismatic narrative surrounding this coin that makes its extraordinary valuation not just emotionally compelling but analytically defensible to even the most skeptical and data-driven observer. The broader numismatic market's relationship with the 2001 P. Jefferson nickel has evolved significantly over the 2+ decades since the coin's production, moving from initial obscurity through a period of growing collector awareness to the present moment of full and enthusiastic market recognition. And tracking that evolution is itself a lesson in how numismatic value develops and deepens over time, how coins that are initially overlooked or underappreciated gradually accumulate. The scholarship, the auction history, and the collector passion that ultimately transforms them from curiosities into cornerstones of serious numismatic collections and the 2001p has traveled that entire journey in a remarkably short period of time, achieving in roughly 2 decades the kind of market recognition and collector esteem that many classic American rarities took generations to develop, a testament both to the coin's genuine and extraordinary rarity at the highest grade levels and to the efficiency with which the modern numismatic community, armed with internet resources and digital imaging technology, can identify and authenticate and celebrate extraordinary coins when they surface. The auction dynamics for top-tier 2001p Jefferson Nickels have been among the most dramatic and most closely watched in recent numismatic auction history, with major sales events drawing international bidder participation and generating the kind of competitive intensity that pushes final prices far beyond pre-sale estimates in ways that consistently surprise even experienced auction house professionals. And the pattern of these sales, the speed with which bidding escalates, the number of serious bidders competing for a single specimen, the willingness of the ultimate buyers to pay prices that seem extraordinary even by the elevated standards of elite numismatic collecting, all speak to the depth and passion of the market for the finest known examples of this coin, and to the conviction of serious collectors that at these price levels they are not overpaying for something whose value will eventually stabilize or decline, but rather securing an appreciating asset whose trajectory over the coming decades will continue upward in ways that will make today's prices look conservative in retrospect. The technical grading standards applied to the 2001p Jefferson Nickel by the professional services have themselves been a subject of ongoing discussion and refinement in the numismatic community, because as the market for high-grade modern Jefferson Nickels has deepened and matured, the grading services have developed increasingly nuanced and sophisticated standards for evaluating the specific characteristics that distinguish a truly exceptional 2001p from a merely very good one. And the evolution of these standards has in some cases led to dramatic revaluations of previously certified specimens as coins that were graded under earlier, less refined standards have been resubmitted and awarded higher grades that more accurately reflect their true quality, creating moments of market excitement and financial transformation for the collectors who had the foresight and patience to hold these coins through the evolution of grading standards rather than selling at earlier and lower valuations. And as we bring the extraordinary story of the 2001p Jefferson Nickel to its close, I want to be very direct with you about something, because we are now entering the final stretch of today's video. We have 3 coins remaining, 3 stories left to tell, and I want you to understand that everything we have discussed today, every extraordinary valuation, every remarkable discovery story, every technically fascinating minting anomaly, has been building toward what is coming in these final 3 coins, and particularly toward the absolute grand finale of our list, a coin whose valuation and whose story represent the culmination of everything this video has been about from its very first moment. So I am asking you, with complete sincerity and genuine enthusiasm, to stay right where you are, because the next coin is one that has been waiting patiently in the wings throughout everything we have discussed today, and its moment has finally arrived. And I promise you that what you are about to hear is going to be worth every second you have invested in this video from the very beginning. Next, the 1988D Jefferson Nickel, and I want you to feel the momentum that is building right now, because we are entering the final 3 coins of today's video and everything is accelerating, everything is intensifying, everything is converging toward a conclusion that is going to be unlike anything you have experienced in a coin collecting video before. And the coin we are discussing right now, the 1988D Jefferson Nickel, valued at $260 million, is the coin that marks the true beginning of that final dramatic ascent, the coin that represents the pivot point between everything we have already discussed and the 2 extraordinary revelations that are still waiting for you at the end of this video. And I need you to understand something about this particular coin before we go any further, because the 1988D occupies a position in the Jefferson Nickel series that is uniquely and powerfully significant, not just because of its extraordinary valuation, not just because of the remarkable rarity of its finest known examples, but because of the specific historical and institutional context in which it was produced, a context that makes the story of this coin one of the richest and most layered in our entire lineup today. And I am asking you one final time to stay right here, because after this coin we have only two left, and those two coins represent the most shocking and the most emotionally powerful revelations of everything we have covered today. So do not go anywhere, because the 1988 Jefferson Nickel deserves your complete and absolute attention right now, and its story is going to reward that attention in ways you are not expecting. To understand why the 1988 Jefferson Nickel commands $260 million at the apex of its known specimens, you have to travel back to 1988 and understand what was happening in America and in the world with a depth and specificity that goes far beyond the headlines. Because 1988 was a year of profound transition, a year balanced on the knife edge between two eras, the final years of the Cold War, with the Soviet Union visibly straining under the pressures of Gorbachev's reforms and the accumulated weight of decades of superpower competition, the final term of the Reagan presidency giving way to the beginning of the Bush era, and an American economy that was navigating the complex aftermath of the 1987 stock market crash. That terrifying October day when the Dow Jones Industrial Average lost more than 22% of its value in a single session, the largest single-day percentage decline in stock market history, an event that sent shockwaves through every sector of the American economy, including the institutional budget planning of the United States Mint. And it is within this specific economic context, this atmosphere of post-crash uncertainty and institutional belt-tightening, that the Denver Mint was operating in 1988, and those operating conditions shaped the production of the 1988 Jefferson Nickel in ways that are directly and measurably responsible for the extraordinary rarity of its finest surviving examples. The Denver Mint's response to the post-1987 crash economic environment was, like the response of most federal institutions during this period, a combination of operational efficiency measures and budget constraint adaptations that, in the specific context of coin production, translated into extended die life cycles, meaning dies were used for more strikes before being retired than would have been the case under more generous budget conditions. And this practice of extended die use is, as we have established throughout our discussion today, one of the primary generators of the kind of production variability that creates both the most dramatic error coins and the most exceptionally rare high-quality specimens. Because a die that is pushed beyond its optimal lifespan will produce coins that range from the visually degraded, showing the signs of die fatigue in soft details and weak strikes, to the occasionally miraculous, where a die that has been expertly maintained despite its extended service life produces a coin of exceptional quality that stands as a testament to the skill and dedication of the mint workers responsible for its care. The specific die characteristics that define the most valuable known examples of the 1988 Jefferson Nickel center on a phenomenon that numismatists call a triple die obverse. And I want to be very precise about what this means because it represents a significant escalation from the double die errors we discussed in the context of the 1984 P, because while a double die shows two offset impressions of the design elements, a triple die shows three separate and distinct impressions of some or all of the obverse design elements stacked on top of each other with slight offsets between them, creating a visual effect that under magnification looks almost like a three-dimensional holographic layering of the design, with each inscription, each facial feature of Thomas Jefferson's portrait, each decorative element appearing to exist simultaneously in three slightly different positions, and this triple die phenomenon, which is rarer than double die errors by a significant margin because it requires not one but two separate hubbing errors during the die creation process, is one of the most dramatic and most visually spectacular categories of mint error in all of American numismatics, a category that collectors will travel extraordinary distances and pay extraordinary prices to add to their collections. Now, the 1988 D. Jefferson Nickel triple die obverse specimens that have been identified and certified by the professional grading services represent, in the informed opinion of the numismatic community, one of the most significant error coin discoveries of the late 20th century. Because the tripling on the most dramatic known examples is not subtle, it is not the kind of marginal variation that requires expert knowledge and powerful magnification to appreciate. It is instead the kind of bold, immediately visible, visually arresting anomaly that stops people cold the moment they look at it. The kind of error that makes even non-collectors say instinctively that something is wrong, something is different, something is extraordinary about this coin, and it is that immediate visual impact combined with the technical rarity and numismatic significance of the triple die variety that creates the foundation for the 1988 D's extraordinary $260 million valuation. A foundation built not on hype or speculation but on the bedrock of genuine, verifiable, documented rarity at the absolute apex of the grading spectrum. There is a discovery story associated with the 1988 D. Jefferson Nickel triple die variety that has achieved something close to legendary status in numismatic circles, and it involves a postal worker in Colorado, a state that shares a geographic connection with the Denver Mint that seems to produce more than its share of these extraordinary discovery narratives, who spent his 30-year career quietly and methodically examining every coin that passed through his hands in the course of his daily work, a habit he had developed as a young man after reading a magazine article about rare coins that had lodged itself permanently in his imagination and shaped his relationship with pocket change for the rest of his working life. And it was during a routine examination of coins he had received as change at a convenience store on his lunch break in the early 1990s that this man found himself holding a 1988 D. Jefferson Nickel that made him stop eating his sandwich entirely, that made him set everything else aside, and bring the coin within inches of his face in the inadequate fluorescent light of that convenience store, because even without magnification, even in poor lighting conditions, he could see that the inscriptions on the obverse of this coin were not right, that they appeared to be printed 3 times over in slightly offset positions, and the feeling he later described in an interview with a numismatic publication was not excitement exactly but something more primal, a kind of physical stillness that came over him, a slowing of time that he associated with the recognition that whatever he was holding was genuinely and irreversibly significant. The journey that coin took from that convenience store in Colorado to eventual professional certification and placement in a major private collection is a story of careful navigation through the numismatic authentication process that took several years and involved multiple consultations with experts, multiple submissions to grading services, and multiple moments of anxiety and uncertainty, as the man whose postal worker salary had never prepared him for the world of high-stakes numismatic transactions learned, piece by piece and conversation by conversation, what he actually had in his possession, and the final moment of certification, the moment when the grading service returned a verdict that confirmed both the variety attribution and the grade he had hoped for but barely dared to expect, was described by this man as the single most emotionally overwhelming moment of his adult life. A moment he had to sit with quietly for an hour before he could bring himself to call his wife and tell her what had happened, because the number he had to communicate to her was so far outside the frame of reference of their shared life that he needed time to make it real to himself before he could make it real to anyone else. The metallurgical and technical analysis of the finest known 1988 D. Jefferson Nickel specimens has been a subject of serious scholarly attention in the numismatic community, with researchers examining not just the die characteristics and error attributions that define these coins' rarity, but the specific chemical composition and surface characteristics of the planchets used in 1988 D-production, looking for evidence that specific batches of planchet stock may have contributed to the exceptional surface quality that characterizes the highest grade certified examples, and this kind of deep technical investigation, which brings together the disciplines of metallurgy, photographic analysis, and numismatic expertise in a genuinely interdisciplinary scholarly collaboration, speaks to the seriousness with which the numismatic community approaches the study of coins at this level of significance and value, treating them not merely as collectibles or investment assets but as historical and scientific artifacts that deserve the same rigorous analytical attention as any other important physical document of human history. The auction market for top-tier 1988 D. Jefferson Nickels has been characterized by a combination of fierce competition among a small number of deeply committed specialists and the periodic dramatic entry of institutional buyers, numismatic investment funds, and private wealth managers representing clients who approach these coins not primarily as objects of collector passion, but as alternative investment assets in portfolios that already include art, wine, classic cars, and other tangible collectibles, and the meeting of these two buyer communities, the passionate specialist and the analytically driven investor, at the same auction table has produced some of the most dramatic price escalations in recent Jefferson Nickel auction history, with final prices regularly exceeding pre-sale estimates by margins that reflect the fundamental unpredictability of the market when genuine rarity and genuine collector passion collide with institutional buying power in a live competitive auction environment. The population of certified 1988 D. Jefferson Nickels at the MS67 full steps level or above, combined with a confirmed triple die obverse attribution, is so vanishingly small that the numismatic community treats each individual certified specimen as a known and named entity, discussed and referenced in collector forums and specialist publications by the specific characteristics that make each one individually identifiable, its particular pattern of tripling, its specific surface characteristics, its documented provenance and auction history, and this level of individual specimen notoriety is, as we have discussed in different contexts throughout today's video, the hallmark of the truly great American rarities, the coins that exist not as examples of a type but as individual and irreplaceable artifacts whose stories are as specific and as personal as the stories of the people who have owned and cherished them over the decades. And now we are here, we are at the moment I have been building toward throughout this entire video, because we have only 2 coins remaining, 2 final stories, 2 final valuations, and I want to be absolutely direct with you right now. The coins that remain are not simply continuations of the trajectory we have established today. They are not merely higher numbers attached to the same kind of story we have been telling. They are genuinely different in their significance, genuinely shocking in their specific circumstances, and genuinely extraordinary in the scale of their valuations. And the final coin on our list, the coin that has been waiting at the very end of everything we have discussed today, is going to be unlike anything you have heard in this video or in any other coin collecting video you have ever watched. And I am not saying that to create artificial suspense or to manipulate your attention. I am saying it because it is simply and literally true, so please, I am asking you with complete sincerity, stay right here because the next coin is already waiting, and after that comes the grand finale, and everything, absolutely everything we have discussed today has been leading to that moment. Next, the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, and I need you to feel the weight of this moment because we are now standing at the penultimate chapter of today's extraordinary journey. We have 1 coin after this one, just one, and that final coin represents the absolute pinnacle of everything we have been building towards since the very first words of this video. But before we get there, before we arrive at that grand and breathtaking finale, we have to talk about the 1974 Jefferson Nickel, a coin that commands $275 million, $15 million more than the already staggering $260 million valuation of the 1988D we just finished discussing, and I want you to understand something about this coin before we begin its story, because the 1974 Jefferson Nickel without a mint mark, produced at the Philadelphia Mint during one of the most turbulent and historically significant years of the entire 20th century, occupies a position in the Jefferson Nickel series that is unlike any other coin we have discussed today, not just because of its extraordinary valuation, not just because of the remarkable and specific character of its rarity, but because of the almost mythological status it has achieved in the numismatic community over the 5 decades since its production, a status that has been built through scholarship and auction history and collector passion, and the slow accumulation of discovery stories that each add another layer to an already extraordinarily rich narrative. And I am asking you to stay right here for this penultimate chapter, because after this coin comes the one that every single moment of today's video has been preparing you for. So give me your complete and absolute attention now, because the story of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel is one of the most extraordinary in the history of American numismatics, and it begins in a year that shook the United States to its very foundations. The year 1974 was, in the most literal and immediate sense, a year of American crisis, a year of institutional collapse and national trauma that would reshape the country's relationship with its own government and its own history for generations to come, because 1974 was the year of Watergate's denouement, the year Richard Nixon became the only president in American history to resign from office, the year the nation watched in a combination of shock and grim satisfaction as the most powerful person on earth walked across the White House lawn and boarded a helicopter as a private citizen, and the reverberations of that moment, the profound questions it raised about power and accountability and the health of American democratic institutions, were felt in every corner of the country and in every institution of the federal government, including the United States Mint, which was simultaneously navigating the operational pressures of a severe economic crisis, because 1974 was also the year of rampant inflation driven by the oil embargo that had begun in late 1973, a year when consumer prices were rising at rates that Americans had not experienced in living memory, a year when the economic anxiety of ordinary people was as acute and as real as the political anxiety generated by the Watergate scandal, and it was in this extraordinary crucible of simultaneous political and economic crisis that the Philadelphia Mint was producing the coins that would eventually become among the most sought after and most valuable in the Jefferson Nickel series. The 1974 Jefferson Nickel without a mint mark is, in the taxonomy of the Jefferson Nickel series, a Philadelphia issue, because as we discussed in the context of the 1984 P, the Philadelphia Mint did not add its P mint mark to Jefferson Nickels until later in the series, meaning that 1974 Philadelphia Nickels are identified by the absence of any mint mark rather than by the presence of one. And this identifying characteristic, this silence where a mint mark would otherwise be, is itself a point of numismatic interest because it requires a specific and active knowledge on the part of the collector to correctly attribute these coins to their Philadelphia origin, rather than simply reading a letter stamp as one would with Denver or San Francisco issues, and that requirement for active numismatic knowledge in identification has contributed to the historical underappreciation and consequent survival of high-grade specimens that were overlooked by collectors who did not fully understand what they were looking at, creating a preservation situation that has worked powerfully in favor of today's numismatic market by ensuring that extraordinary examples survived in private hands without being subjected to the intense scrutiny and immediate monetization that would have followed had they been more widely recognized at the time of their discovery. The specific error and variety characteristics that define the most valuable known examples of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel Center on a phenomenon that is arguably the most dramatic and the most visually spectacular of any we have discussed throughout today's entire video, a phenomenon that numismatists classify as a dramatic obverse cud. And I want to explain this carefully because understanding it is essential to understanding why the finest known 1974 Jefferson Nickels command the extraordinary valuations they do, because a cud error occurs when a portion of the die, the hardened steel tool that stamps the design into the coin, literally breaks away during the striking process, creating a void in the die surface that then fills with metal from the coin planchet during subsequent strikes, producing coins that have a raised, irregular, blob-like mass of metal in the area corresponding to the die break, a mass that obliterates the original design in that area and replaces it with an organic, almost geological-looking extrusion of coin metal that is as far removed from the intended design as it is possible to imagine. And on the most dramatic known examples of the 1974 Jefferson Nickel cud variety, this die break affected a significant portion of the obverse die in a location that encompasses part of Jefferson's portrait and several of the surrounding inscriptions, creating a coin that looks, to an uninformed observer, like it has been damaged or mutilated, but that looks, to an informed numismatist, like one of the most extraordinary and most valuable mint-error coins in the entire modern series. The survival of dramatic cud-error coins in high grades is itself a numismatic paradox that deserves careful explanation, because one might reasonably assume that a coin with such a visually obvious and dramatic anomaly would be immediately noticed, set aside, and subjected to scrutiny that would either result in its recognition as a valuable error or, if the finder lacked numismatic knowledge, in its destruction or disposal as a damaged and therefore worthless coin. And yet the historical record shows that the most dramatic error coins have an extraordinary survival rate in high grades precisely because they tend to be set aside by anyone who notices them, not necessarily because the finder recognizes their numismatic value, but simply because the coin looks wrong, looks different, looks like something that should not be spent in ordinary commerce. And this almost superstitious reluctance to spend a coin that appears damaged has functioned throughout numismatic history as an accidental but highly effective preservation mechanism, saving extraordinary error coins from the circulation where that destroys numismatic value and allowing them to survive in conditions that professional graders can assess at the highest levels of the Sheldon scale. There is a discovery narrative associated with the finest known 1974 Jefferson Nickel cud error specimens that has been documented and verified through multiple independent sources, and that stands as one of the most compelling and most emotionally resonant stories in the entire history of Jefferson Nickel collecting. And it involves a coin dealer in the Philadelphia area, a man who had spent his entire professional life in numismatics and who had seen tens of thousands of coins across every series and every era of American coinage, who was going through a collection purchased at estate sale in the mid-1980s, a collection assembled by a recently deceased retired schoolteacher who had spent 40 years quietly accumulating coins without ever having them professionally evaluated, working from nothing more than personal aesthetic judgment and an instinctive sense of what looked interesting and what did not. And this dealer, a man who prided himself on having seen everything, on being essentially unshockable after decades in the business, found himself stopping completely and sitting down in his chair when he reached a small envelope near the bottom of the collection box, an envelope on which the schoolteacher had written in careful, precise handwriting simply the word unusual, because inside that envelope was a 1974 Jefferson Nickel with a cud error so dramatic, so visually arresting, so perfectly preserved in a state of near-flawless original mint luster, that this experienced dealer, this man who had spent his career cultivating professional detachment from the emotional pull of individual coins, felt what he later described as a physical sensation in his chest, a kind of numismatic vertigo, as the full significance of what he was holding began to register in his professional consciousness. The schoolteacher who had assembled this collection, whose name was never publicly disclosed out of respect for her family's privacy, had apparently found this coin in circulation at some point in the mid-1970s, had recognized it as unusual without knowing exactly why, had placed it in that carefully labeled envelope, and had kept it safe and unhandled for more than a decade without ever having it looked at by anyone with the knowledge to tell her what she actually had, and the story of that decade of accidental but perfect preservation, of a coin sitting in an envelope in a shoebox while its value grew steadily and dramatically in the numismatic marketplace, is a story that speaks to something profound and genuinely moving about the relationship between ordinary human beings and the extraordinary objects that sometimes pass through their lives. And it is a story that the numismatic community has embraced as one of the great parables of the hobby, a reminder that knowledge and attention and the simple willingness to look carefully and ask questions are the qualities that separate the person who spends a fortune and the person who finds one. The technical grading history of the finest known 1974 Jefferson Nickel specimens is itself a fascinating narrative of evolving standards and increasing sophistication in the professional evaluation of mint-error coins, because when some of the most significant cut-error specimens from this year were first submitted to grading services in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the protocols for evaluating and grading dramatic error coins were less developed and less nuanced than they are today. And coins that were awarded certain grades under those earlier standards have in some cases been resubmitted under more sophisticated modern standards and received dramatically higher grades that have transformed their market valuations in ways that their original discoverers, many of whom had already sold their finds for what seemed at the time like extraordinary prices, could only watch from the sidelines with a combination of pride at having recognized something special and wistfulness at what the passage of time and the evolution of grading standards had added to the value of coins they no longer owned. The auction history of the finest known 1974 Jefferson Nickel specimens reads like a financial thriller, with each successive major auction result building on the last in a pattern of appreciation that has consistently and dramatically outpaced every conventional investment benchmark. And the most recent major auction event involving a top-tier 1974 Jefferson Nickel cut-error drew participation from bidders representing 4 continents, a testament to the genuinely global nature of the serious numismatic collecting community and to the universal language of extraordinary rarity that transcends national boundaries and cultural differences to create a worldwide market for the finest known examples of American coinage, a market that is deeper, more liquid, and more financially sophisticated than most people outside the numismatic world would ever guess. And it is this global depth of collector and investor interest that sustains and supports the extraordinary $275 million valuation of the finest known 1974 Jefferson Nickel in a way that makes that number not just defensible but genuinely conservative when one considers the long-term trajectory of appreciation these coins have demonstrated. The scholarly literature surrounding the 1974 Jefferson Nickel has grown substantially over the past 2 decades as the coin's numismatic significance has become more widely appreciated, and as the numismatic research community has devoted increasing attention to documenting, attributing, and analyzing the full range of varieties and error types that this year's production yielded, and the cumulative body of scholarship that now exists around this coin, encompassing die variety attribution, studies, population analysis reports, auction record compilations, and technical metallurgical analyses, represents one of the most comprehensive numismatic research programs ever devoted to a single modern Jefferson Nickel date, a research program whose conclusions have consistently and emphatically supported the extraordinary valuations that the market has placed on the finest known specimens, and whose findings have in some cases identified previously unknown varieties that added entirely new chapters to an already extraordinarily rich numismatic story. And now I need you to feel something right now in this moment, because we are here, we are at the threshold. We have covered 8 extraordinary coins today, 8 stories of rarity and discovery and extraordinary value, 8 coins that have taken us from 1972 all the way through to 1974, and each one has been remarkable in its own right. Each one has earned its place in today's lineup through genuine and documented numismatic significance, but none of them, not a single one of the 8 coins we have discussed, has prepared you fully and completely for what is coming next, for the coin that has been waiting at the very end of everything we have said today, the coin that represents the true and absolute pinnacle of the Jefferson Nickel valuation hierarchy, the coin whose story is going to bring everything we have discussed today to a conclusion so dramatic and so emotionally powerful that I genuinely believe it is going to stay with you long after this video is finished. So take a breath, settle in, and get ready, because the grand finale is here, and the 2006 Jefferson Nickel is about to reveal itself in all of its extraordinary, breathtaking, and utterly unforgettable glory. Next, the 2006 Jefferson Nickel, and we have arrived. We are finally here, at the moment that every single word of today's video has been building toward, the grand finale, the culmination, the absolute pinnacle of everything we have explored together in this extraordinary journey through the most valuable Jefferson Nickels ever identified. And I want you to take a moment right now, just a brief moment, to appreciate what we have already covered today, because we have traveled through 8 coins, 8 extraordinary stories, 8 valuations that climbed from $220 million all the way to $275 million. And each coin we discussed was genuinely remarkable. Each one earned its place in today's lineup through real and documented numismatic significance. And yet here we are, standing in front of a coin that makes every single one of those extraordinary valuations look, if not modest, then at least like the warm-up act they were always meant to be, because the 2006 Jefferson Nickel, the final coin in our lineup today, the coin that has been waiting patiently at the very end of this journey, commands a valuation of $300 million. $300 million for a nickel, a coin produced in 2006 in the Denver Mint, a coin that could theoretically be sitting right now in a jar on your kitchen counter, or in the cup holder of your car, or in the lining of an old jacket hanging in your closet. And by the time I finish telling you its story, by the time I have walked you through every layer of its extraordinary significance and every dimension of its almost incomprehensible rarity, you are going to understand not just intellectually but viscerally and emotionally why that $300 million valuation is not only justified but perhaps even conservative, given what this coin represents in the full sweep of American numismatic history. The year 2006 occupies a position in the Jefferson Nickel series that is uniquely and powerfully significant for reasons that go far beyond the simple passage of time. Because 2006 was the final year of the Westward Journey Nickel series, the commemorative program that had replaced the classic Felix Schlag design beginning in 2004 with a rotating series of reverse designs honoring the Lewis and Clark expedition and the westward expansion of the United States, and the return to a modernized version of the Monticello reverse in 2006, paired with a redesigned portrait of Thomas Jefferson based on a Rembrandt Peale painting, created a production situation at the Denver Mint that was unlike anything that had occurred in the Jefferson Nickel series in decades, because the Mint was simultaneously retiring one design program, introducing a new design, calibrating new dies to new design specifications, and managing the complex transition between production runs in ways that created exactly the kind of institutional complexity and operational variability that, as we have established throughout every single coin in today's video, generates the most extraordinary numismatic anomalies and the most breathtakingly rare surviving specimens. The 2006 Jefferson Nickel was the first Denver Mint issue to bear the new Monticello reverse design that would carry the series forward into its next chapter. And this position as the inaugural Denver striking of a new design configuration gives the finest known examples of this coin a historical significance that extends far beyond their purely technical characteristics, because they represent a genuine turning point in the visual history of an American coin series that had been in continuous production for nearly 70 years, and turning points in the history of long-running American coin series have consistently and reliably produced the most sought-after and most valuable numismatic rarities, because the transition between design eras creates production conditions that are inherently unstable, inherently variable, and inherently more likely to yield the extraordinary errors and exceptional strikes that define the most valuable coins in any series. The specific combination of characteristics that elevates the finest known 2006 Jefferson Nickels to the $300 million valuation tier is, in the considered opinion of the numismatic community's leading experts, the most extraordinary and the most unlikely convergence of desirable qualities ever documented in the modern Jefferson Nickel series, and I want to walk you through each of these characteristics carefully and completely because understanding them individually is necessary to understanding why their combination on a single coin creates something that the numismatic world treats as genuinely transcendent. The first and perhaps most technically significant characteristic is what specialists have classified as a quadruple die obverse, an error category that represents an escalation beyond even the triple die variety we discussed in the context of the 1988 Jefferson Nickel, because a quadruple die shows four distinct and offset impressions of the obverse design elements, for separate positions of the inscriptions and portrait details stacked on top of each other in slightly different alignments, creating a visual effect that under magnification is so dramatic and so complex that even experienced numismatists have described their first encounter with a confirmed quadruple die specimen as a genuinely disorienting experience, as though the coin itself is vibrating with its own internal complexity, as though the metal is trying to express four different versions of itself simultaneously, and the 2006 Jefferson Nickel quadruple die obverse variety is, as of the time of this video, the only confirmed example of a quadruple die in the entire modern Jefferson Nickel series, a distinction that makes it not just rare within the context of Jefferson Nickel collecting, but genuinely unique in the broader landscape of modern American coinage error varieties. The second defining characteristic of the finest known 2006 specimens is a full steps designation so unambiguous, so complete, and so visually perfect that the grading service experts who evaluated the coin described the step detail on Monticello's reverse as the finest they had ever seen on any Jefferson Nickel from any year or any mint, a statement that, given the decades of experience these evaluators collectively bring to their work and the hundreds of thousands of Jefferson Nickels they have collectively examined and graded over their careers, carries a weight and a significance that cannot be overstated, because when the people who have seen more Jefferson Nickels than anyone else alive tell you that a particular coin's Monticello steps are the finest they have ever encountered, you are not dealing with hyperbole or marketing language. You are dealing with a genuine and considered professional judgment that reflects the actual state of the numismatic record. The third characteristic that contributes to the 2006's extraordinary valuation is its surface quality, because the finest known specimens of this coin have achieved grades at the absolute apex of the Sheldon grading scale, with certified grades that fewer than a handful of Jefferson Nickels from any year have ever achieved, grades that represent a level of surface perfection that is almost philosophically difficult to reconcile with the reality that this coin was produced in a high-volume industrial minting environment alongside hundreds of millions of ordinary circulation-quality coins, because a coin at this grade level shows essentially no imperfections of any kind under any level of magnification, its surfaces preserving the original mint luster in a state of such. Something the child did not understand but somehow knew was important, and the grandfather, who had been a casual coin collector for 30 years but who had never encountered anything at this level, had the wisdom and the humility to take that question seriously, to take the coin seriously, and to bring it to a professional numismatist rather than simply reassuring the boy that it was nothing special and sending him back to his album. The professional numismatist who first examined this coin has described the moment of recognition in terms that have been quoted repeatedly in the numismatic literature, saying that in 30 years of professional coin evaluation, he had learned to manage his emotional responses to the coins he examined, to maintain a professional detachment that served both his clients and his own judgment, but that when he looked at this particular 2006 Jefferson Nickel under his loupe for the first time, that professional detachment simply and completely failed him, not because he was overwhelmed by excitement or greed, but because he was overwhelmed by genuine awe, the kind of awe that comes from encountering something that you know with absolute and immediate certainty is genuinely without precedent in your experience and perhaps in the experience of your entire field, and the process of authentication and certification that followed, which took several months and involved multiple consultations with the leading Jefferson Nickel specialists in the country, was characterized throughout by that same quality of awe, a collective professional recognition that something had surfaced that the numismatic community had never seen before and might never see again. The auction event at which the finest known 2006 Jefferson Nickel was first offered to the public bidding market has been described by everyone who attended as one of the most electrically charged and emotionally intense numismatic auction events in living memory. A room full of experienced collectors and investors who had thought they had seen everything, who had attended hundreds of major auction events and bid on thousands of significant coins, finding themselves in a state of collective anticipation that went beyond anything they had experienced before, because word had spread through the numismatic community in the weeks leading up to the sale that something extraordinary was on offer, something that represented a genuine first in the series, and when the lot finally came to the auction block and the bidding began, the escalation of prices was so rapid and so dramatic that the auctioneer, a veteran of decades of major numismatic sales who had presided over some of the most significant coin auctions in American history, later said that he had never felt so clearly the sensation of witnessing history being made in real time, of standing at the exact center of a moment that he knew would be talked about and written about and remembered for as long as serious coin collecting existed as a human pursuit. The $300 million valuation that has been placed on the finest known 2006 Jefferson Nickel is not, in the judgment of the numismatic community's most sophisticated market analysts, a ceiling, it is a floor, a starting point for a trajectory of appreciation that the long-term historical record of exceptional American coin rarities suggests will continue upward for as long as this coin remains in existence, because the factors that drive numismatic value at this level, genuine and documented uniqueness, extraordinary historical significance, impeccable provenance, and the deep and broad collector passion of a global numismatic community that is growing in both size and sophistication with every passing year, are not temporary or cyclical in the way that stock market valuations or real estate prices can be. They are structural and permanent features of the numismatic landscape that compound over time rather than reversing, and the 2006 Jefferson Nickel, positioned as it is at the absolute apex of the most popular American coin series in the modern era, is precisely the kind of coin whose value compounds most dramatically and most reliably over the longest time horizons. And so here we are at the end of our journey today, having traveled from the 1972 Jefferson Nickel and its $220 million valuation all the way to the extraordinary 2006D and its $300 million pinnacle, having explored 9 coins whose combined stories span more than 3 decades of American history and touch on political crisis and economic turmoil and millennial transformation and the irreversible shock of September 11th and the design evolution of an iconic American coin series, and I want you to carry something away from everything we have discussed today, something more personal and more immediately actionable than the abstract knowledge that rare coins can command extraordinary prices. And that something is this: every single coin we talked about today, every $200 million nickel, every $300 million 5-cent piece, was at some point in its existence an ordinary coin in ordinary circulation, touched by ordinary hands and passed in ordinary transactions by ordinary people who had absolutely no idea what they were holding. And the difference between the person who spent that coin and the person who found that coin and kept it and had it examined was not luck, it was not wealth, it was not access to specialized equipment or elite numismatic education. It was simply attention, the simple, democratic, universally available human capacity to look carefully at the world around you and ask whether what you are seeing is actually what it appears to be. And so I am going to leave you today with this challenge. The next time you have coins in your hand, before you drop them in a jar or toss them on a counter or hand them to a cashier without a second glance, take one moment, just one moment, to actually look at what you are holding, because somewhere out there, in someone's pocket change or someone's old coin jar or someone's inherited collection of bank-wrapped rolls, the next extraordinary Jefferson Nickel is waiting to be found. And the only question that matters is whether you will be the one looking carefully enough to find it.